Hello and welcome to Nine Inch Charge. Welcome to the Old World show and welcome Jeremy.
Hi, great to be back again.
Today we are going to talk about Grand Cathay because there has been a brand new trailer and a brand new article and the whole army roster has been revealed to us. We know every single unit type that is going to be available, at least in the computer game, and we know about all the spell laws and just a whole slew of information has come our way. So we've been spending our time trying to decipher it and work out what we think playstyles could be for the tabletop game as best we can. And we're going to go through all of our thoughts on all of the individual units and how we think the army will look and play on the tabletop, and any extras that we think that we might see in the form of magic items and things like that. So to kick us off, Jeremy, let's just talk about the army broadly speaking, about the army mechanics. So it has this very unique mechanic called yin and yang.
Yeah, absolutely. So it feels like there's going to be a real strong synergy between different units, with certain units working really well if they're paired up together, sort of amplifying and boosting their main attributes, which is something I don't think we've really ever actually seen in any Warhammer army before. So it makes it really unique.
Yeah. So yeah, they seem to be amplified, as you said, if they're in close proximity to their counterparts. And so the units of yin are like the ranged units, your crossbowmen and archers, and your the flying war machines and the cannons, the kinds of things that kind of work from range. And your yang units are your up close and personal melee units, cavalry, and the war compass. And what's interesting is that you would normally wouldn't think of these two as fighting closely together. You would think of your, especially your cavalry and your other units, charging off and being supported at range. So this, as a play style for me, if they've got to be close together, this army is going to play very much how Dan Jolly used to play his dwarf army, actually, if I remember, where they're all going to be in a corner somewhere and it's going to be right, well, you come at me because the synergies are going to work best together.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you've got one attribute which makes the units increase their ability to shoot at a faster rate, and obviously another which is making them harder to hit. So yeah, absolutely, both of those are super defensive attributes. And if you're gonna, yeah, like you said, if you want them both to be able to bounce off each other, then you need to have them in close proximity. And you see that really emphasized with some of the descriptions of the troops as we go through them, where there's a huge emphasis on things like spears and halberds, and yeah, a defensive play style, which I guess makes sense for an army that is there to hold back the ravaging hordes of chaos and keep the old world safe.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that's in the lore. Every time any of these great bastions and cities and things are mentioned, it's all about the city walls and how they're sort of relentlessly having to defend against wave after wave of chaos and different kinds of incursions and Skaven and ogres and things like that. That are clambering to get into their empire, and they seem to be, rather than being an expansive force, they seem to be sort of doing their best holding the walls and maintaining what they've got.
But yeah, I think also the other thing to say, obviously with this sort of dual effect, it's going to be the units are going to need to stay together and avoid being outflanked or basically moved into a position where they are separated out. So I guess once it's there, it needs to, like you said, stay there. They are going to play like a beardless, more squishy dwarfs. Otherwise, as soon as they have to turn around to react to something, yeah, they're going to start to lose, and their buffs are going to drop down, and their effectiveness, I guess, is going to drop.
There is a mechanic that we'll look at later on that is for one of the halberd units, and the longer they stay in situ, the more defensive and the more buffs they get for staying still. But saying that, there are units there is fast cavalry in there is flying cavalry, and there is sort of the equivalent of the gyro bomber in the sky junk. There are things that will be moving around and guarding the flanks. So it's going to be an interesting play style to see. Along with the yin and yang unit types, there's also yin and yang spell laws. So I'm just going to read what it says here on the article about each of the laws, and we'll just have a little think about them. So the first one is the law of Yang, which focuses on buffing allies with resolute belief or disrupting enemies with walls of wind. In particularly dire situations, it can also unleash mighty explosions upon the enemy, bringing with it the power of the celestial dragon emperor himself. And the spells are Jade Shield, Dragon's Breath, Wall of Wind and Fire, Stone Ground Stance, Might of Heaven and Earth, and Constellation of the Dragon. So there are some there. Stone Ground Stance seems to be a defensive buff, and Dragon's Breath, will seem probably a magic missile, some things like that.
Or maybe a flame template. That's what I was thinking. Possibly that'll be quite good fun.
Yeah, that would be cool. If it emanated from the mage, that would be really cool. And then the Law of Yin is a more esoteric school with the power to reflect projectiles or to summon ghosts of the dead to assist in battle. Those who practice it can shield their allies behind obstruction and remove foes of the dead. Remove foes in the dead of night. The spells are Storm of Shadows, Cloak of Jet, Missile Mirror, Blossom Wind, Talons of Night, and Ancestral Warriors.
So I got from that a little bit of a sort of like a Law of Shadows kind of vibe from that, about sort of like, misdirection, sort of like playing tricks on the opposition. What was your take on
it? The first thing that struck me was this missile mirror, because in the new video they've released, there's a point where the horrors are launching their missile attacks, and then the mage puts this sort of wall up in the sky, and then their missile attacks are turned back onto the horrors. And it made me think that that's a very interactive kind of spell and disruptive kind of spell, and a spell that seems to be working in the shooting phase, which isn't something that we've ever seen in the game before, because obviously that should all happen in the magic phase. And how that would translate to the tabletop, I don't know. But
it's also a really interesting consideration, because usually you fire a war machine or fire your artillery or missile units at an enemy, without much concern of the repercussions of that. But to have the realization that they could bounce off and hit your own troops, that's going to make you think twice before you do it. And it looks like it's going to be quite a squishy army. There's a limited amount of like high toughness troops in it. Missile troops are what a lot of opposing armies aren't actually going to gravitate to. So to have something as a counter to that is going to be a real ace up their sleeve.
Maybe, just thinking about it a bit further, maybe this missile mirror is cast onto a friendly unit, and then if they're shot at, subsequently it repels the missile.
Could be. Or could just maybe simply manifest itself as a sort of ward save or something similar like that. Although that would be a bit less interesting, a bit more boring, but
Yeah, I'd like to see the missiles actually turned away, and go back onto the enemy. I'd love to see a cannonball redirected. Just right, and it'd be cool if you could choose the direction, like pick a line.
Yeah.
No, I'll pick a line now, thank you. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see with that one. I quite like the idea of having summoning ancestral warriors. This is something that we talked about briefly before, and we know ancestor worship has been very prominent in Eastern religions for a long time, and that's something that I think would be really interesting to see. We did talk about having legions of terracotta foot warriors rather than just the big constructs, didn't we? And also the other good thing about having undead spectral legions is that they're just really easy to paint.
True. And you can do a Lord of the Rings on them as well, which is always good fun.
Yeah. So what have we got next? So that's pretty much what we know about Yin and Yang at the moment. What's interesting is that the two named characters that we've got, Mao Ying, the Storm Dragon, who we saw from the first trailer, and Zhao Ming, the Iron Dragon, they are both, one is Yin and one is Yang. And I don't know if they're very much going to be incarnates of that. And something I was thinking about that is, if you bring Mao Ying and she has the Law of Yin with her that she can cast, are you actually then going to take more Yang units to counteract her, or is she going to buff the Yin units? Because it's all about opposites, isn't it? So I think we'll just have to wait and see. I don't really know.
That's an interesting mechanic to consider, because it's kind of a sort of like a variation on in your army selection where you'd have to have a certain number of core units or special units. Do you have to do a similar thing with Yin and Yang troops? Just on that character, I just wanted us to talk about one of her rules, which I really enjoyed, which was disdain of dragons. So anyone who tries to fight her is at a significant disadvantage, and I just love the idea of this dragon who's just like, "What are you doing, mere mortals? Go away! I can't be asked with this." Like very much like an elven attitude, but in dragon form. So yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, so Mao Ying is the storm dragon, and she has access to, as you said, the law of yin, and she also has access to the law of life and has that ability, disdain of dragons. She also has the ability, along with her brother, which is dragon transformation, where she can start the tabletop in her human-like form, where she might be the spellcaster and the buffer and things like that, and then she can transform into her dragon form and become a really, formidable melee character. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. That's something that we did see in the new Marathi kit for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. If you remember, they had her as a sort of mortal form, and then the form that she would go into, and it's something that we have sort of touched on before. I always remember thinking of Malus Darkblade when he'd get overtaken by a demon and become like sort of a different form.
Yeah, sort of go to like Jekyll and Hyde, that sort of that's a really good comparison with Marathi. Yeah, I guess if you've got these two characters, they're going to need to be a dragon form and a human form as well, which also is quite cool. It's where to like remove an infantry model and then replace it with a freaking dragon. That's got to be a cool moment.
There was a spell that let you do that, wasn't there, in the Law of Beasts?
Oh, there was, yeah. Well, I don't know how many people did that, because then obviously you had to own a dragon or all the other big monsters that you need to replace it with.
What's nice about this is that you're able to turn your wizard into a dragon, and you don't have to, at the beginning of the game, roll a dice and hope that you get that spell to be able to do it. Now you will just be able to do it. So yeah, that's really, really cool. And so she's like kind of like the alpha dragon, isn't she? She's like the celestial dragon emperor's favorite, and she resides over the main Nangao, which is like the biggest fortress city, and it's never been overrun before or defeated ever in its entire history. And her brother Zhao Ming, the Iron Dragon, is a little bit different to her. He's sort of like the underdog in a way, city that he and the lands that he guards, the wars have been breached in the past, and they've had to spend time rebuilding them. The law says that he's a bit more down to earth, although his proximity where he is next to Warpstone is beginning to kind of make him a little bit irrational, I suppose, compared to his other brothers and sisters. But I quite like him because he is the underdog, and so he is the incarnate of Yang, and he has the law of metal, and he also has the dragon transformation ability, but instead of having disdain, he has the warding iron, and that is the Iron Dragon's near invulnerability can be passed on to his nearby troops for a short time.
Which again is a really nice emphasis on that sort of defensive nature of the army, that you've got so many buffs that you can sort of add to your troops, and that sort of seems to be a lot of the epitomes of that sort of that characteristic of the army.
Yeah, so for me at the moment, as it stands, I think I am team Zhao Ming as it stands, because I always root for an underdog, I think, and he's not quite. I've got an arrogant, haughty elven army. Maybe I need someone who's a bit more down to earth, I suppose.
Well, I like the idea of him being a bit more unpredictable as well, and also inviting alchemists into the land makes him sound like he's going to be a bit more kind of more wacky, crazy inventions. So that's more fun.
Yeah. All right, so those are the two named characters that we have, and they're really great, really interesting named characters. We've spoken before, Jeremy, before we recorded about dual kits. Now, do you think that will happen with these dragons? You have like one dragon that you can make into either one, and they come with both miniatures, or do you think they'll be independent standalone kits?
I would have thought that they would be standalone kits, just because the characters are obviously very, very different, and the infantry versions are very different to look at. So I can't see them being much sort of like cross compatibility with the kits. But also, I think that just to encourage people to buy both variations, because to be honest, if you had 2 twin dragons, you're going to want to buy both of them, aren't you? So I thought GW might lean into that a little bit more and just say, well, in that case, why be restricted? Why let's make them both as unique and different as possible by having two separate sets. But I don't know. Could be completely wrong about that.
I hope they do that. They're so you may not know, Jeremy, but coming this December are 2 named character dragons for the Stormcast Eternals and Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and they look like they're going to be a dual kit. Their poses are quite similar, and it does. If you wanted to take both of them, as you said, they would look. Although one's painted blue and one's painted red, if you painted them both blue or both red, there wouldn't be too much difference between them. And hopefully, as you said, there'll be unique kits for unique characters that would make them look really good. So I hope that's the case. I don't mind a dual kit. There's a lot of dual kits that I think are really great, but I just, for unique characters, I'd like to see it, as we say, be unique.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, we've got the Lords. So the first one is the Dragon-Blooded Shengan Lord.
I thought this was a really interesting one because I kind of, when I heard that there was going to be basically, it's a empire ruled by dragons and there's 2 main dragon characters, I really hoped that they were going to not restrict that dragon theme just to those 2 special characters. So the fact that actually you have sort of lesser dragons, sort of like demi-dragons who can still lead an army, means that you got an opportunity to sort of like play with that mechanic a bit more, and that you're not just reserving that, for like big, 2,000 plus point battles where you're taking named characters. You can introduce into smaller, more low-key games as well. So I thought that was a really nice touch to include that.
Yeah, I think it's really cool as well. As you said, I think they did mention it before that that they had spellcasters and things who are dragon blooded, and they also hold high office in the cities because they have this sort of regal connection, and they fight with either the law of Yang or the law of Yin as well. So you don't have to only have one of the actual celestial dragons fight for you to have access to the law. You can get it through your dragon-blooded lords, but the rest of the spellcasters don't have access to this law. It's something that is exclusive to people who have dragon blood.
And that's interesting because that is going to limit the availability of those laws. So presumably that means that I don't know if they were going to be like a lord versus a hero character, but if they are going to, and I presume they would be perhaps lord as they are dragon descended, but it does mean, you're going to have a limited access to the yin yang magic law.
Yeah, they are lords. So in the article, it doesn't tell you what's core, special, or rare, but it tells you what's a lord and what's a hero. So we know that they're going to be lords, and they can be mounted on a war horse, or a jade longma, which we'll have a look at later on. And the next lord type is my favorite lord type, actually, and that is the Lord Magistrate. And their true strength lies in their ability to bring the best of Grand Cathay to the fore, vastly increasing the bonuses troops receive by working in harmony with one another. So they are your true kind of strategist or commander, and they're working on the battlefield to make sure that everyone is working within cohesion. Like a real general should do, really. Often in these games that we play, you don't really have a general, you have a hero who goes out and fights battle and your army just does what it does. But it's nice to have a character who is actually a general on the battlefield.
Yeah, I thought that, and just even like the artwork of the character, he's far more down to earth than anything else. He just seems like more like a real person. And also, if you like do a comparison with like ancient China, one of the reasons why the empires endured so much was because they had really good bureaucracy and really good systems and infrastructure in place. And so to have a character that sort of emphasizes that sort of like level of organization that Cathay has is a really nice, cool touch.
What I like about him the most is that he can ride a sky lantern, and then he gets a perfect overview of the whole battlefield and can direct it from up there. And we'll go on to see later that the sky lanterns, they can release flags and smoke and all different kinds of signals to the troops below to direct the battlefield, and I really like that idea that you could do that. And I always wanted to. I saw some. This is going off on a bit of a tangent now, but I saw some people play a game of Warhammer Fantasy Battles where they were playing in separate rooms, and then you'd only hear about you. And then you'd have like a runner between the rooms who would tell you about the enemy troop movements.
Oh my word!
And
True fog of war there.
Yeah, and then you'd move the units like that, and and there would have been times in real life where you don't know what the enemy is going to do, and you have to kind of predict what they're going to do. And I think it's just a cool element that you could add into the game, and I especially like the idea of him being like this grand overseer of the army and directing it from his sky lantern. So yeah, he's number one for me.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so next we've got the heroes, and there are two hero types. We've got the alchemist and the astromancer.
One thing I really liked about this, because they were mentioned in the previous article, and so we kind of assumed that they would be wizards using the law of metal and the law of heavens, but it was really nice to just actually have that spelt out for us, and said that yes, these are the main laws that that most of the humans will be using. What I thought was really interesting is the fact that it implies that the heavens, the astromancers will have a bit of a bonus, because the Celestial Dragon Empire is favors Law of Heavens and has harnessed it and is a strong connection with it. So they might see a bonus or a buffer if when using that law, as opposed to what potentially, I don't know, let's say the Empire could muster instead for it. So I thought that was interesting.
Just on a bit of a segue about the astromancers, do you know much about the Great Maw, Jeremy?
I don't actually know.
Okay, so the Great Maw is in ogre country, and it is a great big cavernous jaw. It's got like teeth coming out of the ground, and it bores right down into the earth. And the ogres worship it as a god, and they think that it's bored all the way down to the other side of the world. But actually, how it was formed was that the ogres on the edge of the empire of Cathay were getting too populous, and their incursions were getting too frequent. So the astromancers all got together, and they cast this massive comet that came out of the sky, and it had like a great big like mouth or face on it, and it just flew like straight down into the middle of ogre territory, and like went boom, just like straight into the ground and burrowed straight down. And the effects of it, they say, were felt the other side of the world. And it decimated about 75% of the ogre population and has kept them down to this time. But the ogres, they saw this massive jaw from heaven come down and like start to like bore its way through the ground, and now they worship it, but they don't have any idea that it's not actually a deity, and it was all along the Cathay and astromancers that had caused it.
I had no idea about that. That's so cool. Like some sort of like giant Sarlacc pit, if we're getting reference Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly like that. So that's just a little segue about the astromancers and why you should include one in your army, especially with this strange war compass that they can ride into battle. That
I love that.
And amplifies their powers. Yeah. The thing to say about the alchemist is in the flavor text, it says that obviously they take the law of metal, but it says as well as that, they give unique buffs that can be amplified to themselves or nearby units, providing massive bonuses to attack or armor. So they're another kind of yang based force. And that's something that, obviously it can buff armor. We know a lot of this stuff is going to buff defenses, but also this can buff them offensively as well. What have we got next? I think we've got some actual units coming up next year, which is nice. So we're going to go through the Yang units first, of the infantry types. So these are the fighting infantry, and we're going to start with the lowest, which is the peasant long spearman.
Can't say no to some peasants. Just some sort of low fantasy troops. Love it.
Yeah. What's cool about these is obviously it says they're long spearmen, and what is cool about that is it gives them defense for a charge. They can brace, and they're suitable for anti-cavalry and receiving cavalry charges. So you probably want to lay these guys out in the front of your army and let them take all the hits before you move in with your other units.
See, I'm really hoping this is Games Workshop referencing the fact that spearmen were never really quite as good against cavalry as you would imagine they would be. You could never really do like a Braveheart scene with spearmen where they just completely annihilate a unit of cavalry. So I'm hoping this is sort of a hint that they will be that really good, strong counter to any cavalry charges in the future. I also really liked the fact that they basically had a rule which said they're not expected to hang around, they're probably going to run away. So I kind of immediately thought of like the Bretonian men-at-arms, the peasants, where if they panic, no one blinks and there's no panic tests for anyone to take. So I wonder if we get a similar mechanic for them as well.
It would be good, especially if we're saying you're going to put them out in the front of your army, because there's nothing like having a unit flee through your army to start to disperse your ranks and make everybody run away. So we can expect low leadership from them. We can expect them to be expendable, but they are going to, take the brunt of the charges from the oncoming enemy. I don't really want to say Operation Human Shield, but it's something along those lines, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a peasant. Looking at the artwork, I can't see a huge amount of armor on them there. So yeah, they are going to fall quite quickly, I think.
Next up is the Jade Warriors, and now these are Grand Cathay's line troops, and they're the standing army, and they are expertly trained, and they have a number of variants. You can have swords and shields, or you can have halberds.
One thing I thought was interesting again was the article again referenced them, even though we think of halberds being quite an offensive weapon, but again the article references them being used in a defensive capacity as well. So yeah, even the more offensive troops, I'll be referenced in that manner. So I don't know whether they will have a defensive style of play with a halberd potentially, but the introduction of a shield is also useful, also to sort of give them a bit more staying power than the peasantry above.
Yeah, it does say here that Jade Warriors adopt a defensive stance when immobile, making them harder to charge and kill. So something a bit similar to, I guess, creating a shield wall or something like that. But they can do it even with their halberd. So there's going to be, but it's going to be a playstyle mechanic that's similar to creating a shield wall. And then when they move, then obviously they're going to break that formation. So they must fight in some kind of very close-knit formation, I suppose.
Yeah, and obviously, and you referenced before we started this call that that they become more and more resistant the longer they stay there. So I wonder if this is some sort of like stubborn mechanic that gets more and more effective the longer either the combat goes on for, or the longer they're stationary for.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Buff the leadership or something like that.
Although I've got to say, you'd have to keep track on that, because otherwise you just forget how many turns of combat I've been in now. So I'd be interested to see how they do that in a way that you keep track of it.
Maybe there'll be another handy table somewhere.
They love a table.
All right, and next up for the close combat melee foot troops, we've got the Celestial Dragon Guard, and they are the most elite soldiers, and they are the official legion of the Dragon Emperor. And it does say that they are superior than the Jade Warriors in every way. However, there's a lot less of them. So I'm thinking this might be just signaling to us that they might be like a 0-1 rare or something like that.
Yeah, it definitely feels like rare. I guess it could possibly be special, but yeah, but definitely in limited quantities. Absolutely.
Yeah, they still might be a 0-2 special or something like that.
Yeah.
They only take halberds, actually.
And also, it's nice to see a unit that might, just going on the artwork, potentially have heavy armor as well. So you get getting something which is take a bit of damage and still pull through as well.
Oh yeah, heavy armor and a halberd is definitely the way forward, isn't it? So they'll get that additional to their strength as well. All right, so next we've got the ranged units, and there's some really interesting ranged units, actually. I think, obviously, Cathay is known for its different fantastical kind of ranged units, and it looks like the melee troops and the state troops are just there to kind of hold the line to allow the ranged units to do what they excel at. So let's have a look at some of these. So first up, we've got the peasant archers, who again are the lowest kind of ones. But it does say in the lore that actually archery is considered a noble and useful pastime in Grand Cathay, and sort of every household will have a bow, and especially young girls are encouraged to follow the path of the Moon Empress into ranged combat. So there's no shortage of people who are adept with a bow, although they might not be, your professional soldiers. They are going to be somewhat useful, I suppose.
Yeah, and this could be a good example of potentially where GW might have a dual kit where you can either equip them with bows or spears, depending on what you want. But if I can imagine them, being a good opportunity for one kit that could fulfill both roles.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think we will see that, because there's also some when we get onto them, there are some Jade Warriors that have bows as well. So I think it would just make sense, wouldn't it, if they could try and do that.
The other thing that's worth mentioning in this one is because obviously as we go on, we reach some much heavier shooting units, but the article does make a point of saying that these peasant archers, they're not going to do much against heavily armored foes. So these are probably sort of like, I would guess, low strength free type shots without any armor piercing rules attached.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm looking to try and see where you would take these over the guys with the long spears, because for a cheap chaff unit, when there are the units that we've got coming up, I can't quite see where you would take them. We'll just have to wait and see, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a fair point. If you could take the crossbowmen, which we're about to talk about, then why would you not take them and have something with a bit more? Which be able to do basically a bit more damage. Maybe it comes down to the points potentially. Sometimes the cheaper unit is just better.
Maybe you just want to fill out your core with cheap spam. Just take the minimum, and then get yourself some flying cavalry later on.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, we've got what's the next on the list?
The Iron Hail Gunners.
That's right, Jeremy. Why don't you tell us about the Iron Hail Gunners?
Yeah, so this one here, we are talking about a unit which has got one of my favourite weapons, which previously has only been the Preserve of Chaos Dwarfs, and that is the Blunderbuss. So sounds like a unit which basically short-ranged, probably difficult to sort of maneuver and get in the right place, but if it is pointed in the right direction and you have to be close by, it's probably going to sort of tear it to shreds. So this is one of the units which I got really excited about, and I can't wait to hear more about what it will do. I think it's going to be a difficult unit to pull off correctly. It sounds like it's probably going to be move or shoot, and limited range compared to everything else. But I think it could be quite good to tear apart, say, some Chaos Warriors or anything else like that. Some heavy armor piercing punch is how to describe, but much shorter range than the archer sort of crossbowmen.
These are the units that we saw in the first trailer, aren't they? That when the army was coming along, they shot into the army, and then the spearmen, I think they were the Jade guys. Actually, they came. The halberdiers came up in front of them, and then received the charge.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I remember watching that and seeing lots of sparks fly by and go, "Oh, are they shooting some sort of like flaming missiles?" But yeah, I think you're right. It must be the blunderbusses.
I wonder if they'll be. Yeah, as you said, it'll be difficult to use them. They might be one of these units that you use to receive a charge and they stand and shoot and do a load of damage. You might think, if you've got, for example, if you've got 10 of these guys and you've got 5 heavy cavalry coming their way, are you actually going to want to charge them? Because if they stand and shoot against you, they are going to potentially rip you to shreds. So
yeah,
they might have their uses there.
They might be very much like the red shirts. you put them there, they're going to do some damage, but you also know they're not going to make it through the whole game by any stretch.
Oh, I love a Star Trek reference, Jeremy. You know that.
You're welcome. We'll dig some more out.
And next is the Crane Gunners. So the mighty crane gun requires 2 people to lift, set up, and fire. One is positioned at the trigger, ready to sight and shoot anything in a massive range, and the other carries the tower shield on which the gun rests, steadying it for the shooter and providing built-in cover.
So do you want to whisper this, or shall I?
I think I know what's coming. Go on.
They're just sales. They're just sales.
Yeah, they are somewhat reminiscent, aren't they?
Yeah.
So we've got some Giselles. There's nothing really more to say than that, really, is there? You know, it says that it does say that they act as effective snipers. So whether or not people get the lookout server or when they use them or not is something that we might have to consider. Or potentially, could they target a unit champion or unit something like that? You know, we don't know. But yeah, pretty much they are Giselles. So if you're a fan of using Giselles in your army, you'll enjoy these.
In my head, it's just like these Skaven trying to hide their tails under the robes, just like no one need know. We're human. We're honestly human.
There is something, actually. There's a bit of a tie-in between Cathay and Eshin, but I don't know too much about it. But the Eshin assassins and sort of ninja style sort of warriors and things, I swear they learned all that from Cathay. So maybe they swapped a bit of technology.
Yeah, I was thinking that just after we recorded our previous episode of Cathay, and we're trying to think about other references. But yeah, absolutely, there is that tribe, Clan Eshin. Yeah, they learned everything they knew from Cathay.
So there we are. Now we know what Cathay learned from Clan Eshin. All right, Jeremy, why don't you talk about the next unit, because you absolutely called this in the last episode that we did about Cathay, didn't you?
Oh yeah, so next up we have got the Jade Warrior crossbowmen, so probably again another dual kit to go with the halberdiers. But they obviously are equipped with crossbows, and one of the things we were talking about during our last time was the fact that the Chinese developed something which I'm now going to mispronounce terribly, but the Chukunu, which is basically a crossbow with a magazine cartridge so it can fire a rapid series of shots all in one go, which sounded terribly like a repeating crossbow for the Dark Elves, and it sounds like we are going to have a multi-firing crossbow for the Jade Warriors, so yay.
So these come with crossbows and shields, and obviously the shield is useful for ranged units, as you will know, Jeremy, from your Dark Elf crossbowmen, because when it comes to it, and you're thinking, oh, I want to take off my opponent's shooting unit. If yours has a shield and theirs doesn't, you're going to outlast that sort of ranged fight.
Absolutely. And again, it just sort of plays into that this being an army which is just going to emphasize the defensibility even in its missile troops, which is quite nice.
I wonder what the range of these repeater crossbows will be, because the thing about the Dark Elf repeater crossbow is that it's got a range of 24 inches, and obviously you deploy 24 inches apart. And it was always the case whenever we played, Jeremy, wasn't it, that I'd always try and deploy 24.1 inches away from you, and then it forces a move on your unit. So I would quite like to see, for Dark Elves as well, I'd quite like to see an increase to the range of these just by an inch or something like that, maybe, so that they can be useful in the first turn.
Yeah, it was always a pain in the ass having to then take the penalty for moving, and then realize I'm hitting on sixes now. But yeah, I was just thinking if there's anything else which the other interesting thing which I quite liked about it was it talks about how the Jade Warriors, their crossbows was close to industrialized production as Grand Cathay got, and I was doing some history on medieval China, and yes, the crossbows were something that they got incredibly good at making and producing in vast numbers. So I was like, yeah, nice tie in there, which I enjoyed as the history buff and geek that I am.
And obviously, after we've got the Jade Warriors, we have the Celestial Dragon Warriors, and they have crossbows as well. And they have dragon crossbows, which are repeating powerhouses with armor-piercing bolts that rip through almost anything. So these are, I guess, a similar variant, but they're an armor-piercing variant.
Yeah. These actually I might have got confused. Actually, maybe these are the repeating crossbows on the Celestial Dragon crossbowmen, and maybe the Jade crossbowmen are just standard crossbows. So yeah, that might be.
Yeah, I think that'll be.
Might have got my units muddled up when we were reading through it. But again, it does beg the interesting question: why would you have Jade Warrior crossbowmen if you could have Celestial Dragon crossbowmen? And maybe that will come down to them just being limited in numbers, dissimilar to the close combat troops.
I think it'll be points, and if you want to invest more heavily in your yin troops, then maybe you will choose the Celestial Dragon ranged units, and if you want to invest more in your yang troops, you'll choose the Celestial Dragon melee units. Like I said, it'll probably just come down to that choice and where in 2,000 points you want to put the bulk of your points.
Yeah.
So if you still want a bit of shooting that's reliable, then you can use the Jade Warriors, I suppose. Next we've got, it says cavalry and chariots. So I'm assuming that, although I don't think there are any chariots actually.
I was just having the same thought myself, and then I looked down and realised that the war compass would technically be a chariot, so I think that's what it's referring to. Okay. Although, again, if you want to go back to Chinese history, they did actually have a large amount of chariots. So possibly there are units that have not been disclosed yet, but we shall see.
So firstly, we've got a peasant unit again. So it seems to be always the way. You've got peasant Jade and then Celestial Dragon. So the peasant horsemen. Now these actually sound quite interesting and like they've got a bit of a use because they look like they're going to be some sort of fast cav. It says they're the fastest Cathay cavalry that can't fly, and they're a scout and act as a vanguard. So they might be able to make a vanguard move at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, they've got fast cavalry written all over them, don't they? Really, and I wonder that in the fluff, there's something interesting about them, maybe like patrolling along the Great Bastion, sort of like looking out for sending messages along the line, or keeping an eye out for marauding troops as they descend from the Chaos Wastes.
See, it's funny that's what you thought when you read about them, because what I thought when I read about them was, I'll send them up and I'll put them at a bit of an angle. So if anybody wants to charge them, they'll then have to reform and go that way. And then I'll just flee and leave them out of position. And, and if they do charge them, I don't mind because it just tangles people up. But I've been playing with, I guess I was playing with Great Eagles for so long doing that sort of thing and the double flee and stuff. For me, if you've got a unit, I used to play Wood Elves that's primarily ranged, you're going to want a unit that you can throw up the battlefield and just get in the way. And especially if they're low points cost, if they're anything under 100 points, I think if they tie up a unit, it doesn't matter if they kill anything. If they slow them down, pull them out of position, then they're just worth it. If they're just harassers. And I don't really think that you can underestimate how valuable that will be for this army, even if you think, oh, well, they're just peasant,
Yeah, I think, for an army that needs to spend as much time keeping the army at a distance so it can pour shots after shot into it, and I think that can either disrupt march block, force you to turn around, it's going to earn its points back.
Yeah, and then we got the Jade Lancers, who look to be heavy cavalry. Slower but heavier than standard horsemen, so it might be medium or heavy cavalry. Yeah,
they look. It looks like a sort of a bog standard unit. In my head, and I say this without any knowledge whatsoever, I'm kind of assuming that they won't be amazing just because the whole army seems to be emphasizing that defensive style of play more. So I can't see them being the best heavy cavalry, but it's nice that they have the option to take something if they want to.
It does say here that conforming to Grand Cathay's defensive nature, they're far hardier than other factions' cavalry of a similar sort.
Oh, no, you're right. Yeah, I see.
But saying that, defensiveness has never been a problem of cavalry. The problem of cavalry is, can they do enough damage on the charge? And if they're emphasizing them being defensive, again, they can go into a unit, and as long as they're stubborn or there's someone, there's a battle standard bearer nearby or something like that, then it seems like they'll be able to hold up a unit very successfully. But I do worry that they'll be able to do the damage. Not that that's a concern because of the next unit. Do you want to introduce these, Jeremy?
Yeah, let's go for it. So obviously we've got the great Longma Riders, which are these winged horses that we saw in the trailer, like in the distance. So it's really nice to learn a bit more about them and see have to get their day in the sun. Limited only to those with dragon blood, but they focus on dealing damage from afar, with speed on the charge, and also a huge amount of power and toughness in terms of armor. So they sound very similar to Pegasus Knights.
Yeah, they do, especially coming from nobility and having
Yeah.
this dragon bloodline. It's a very strong parallel, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think they're going to be just as annoying, potentially more so, because the army is going to be hanging back. Apart from these super duper knights who are going to be sort of sweeping around, trying to position themselves for probably for a good rear charge, targeting any enemy war machines. So yeah, while you're trying to charge forward to try and get to the Cathay infantry before you get completely demolished, you're going to be trying to keep an eye out for these flying troops trying to get behind you at the same time. So yeah, it'll give you something else to think about for sure.
One of the things that it says about them is, such is the strength of the long charge, their enemies have been known to flee in fear before they are even beaten. And just flashbacks to outnumbered by a fear-causing enemy by your Cold War knights and just auto-breaking. That seems like something that that is likely to be happening with these guys. I'm sure they'll cause fear.
Yeah, I think if I was confronted by a giant green winged horse, I would probably start to scatter. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is ridden by a dragon.
Also, it looks like they probably got scaly skin, so I imagine you're going to get a scaly skin save. So you could potentially be looking at least a 2+, if not a 1+ armor save on them. So they're definitely going to be tough.
Yeah, and we're saying rare, and I'm going to say 0 to 1 is what I'm going to say, because they're dragon blooded. I mean, there's not that many that you're going to have in your army. Surely there's not that many of them around. They're reserved really to be we saw your level 3 and 4 spellcasters, and they're the nobility. I can't see you having. I'd hope that you wouldn't see any more than 2 anyway in an army.
Oh well, I mean, yeah, in terms of just playing against them, you would bloody well hope so, wouldn't you? Yeah. I think, yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, 0 to 1 rare, base profiled rider being at least strength 4 with a lance, a 2-1 up armor save, fear causing, maybe monstrous stomp potentially on them. But yeah, I think they're going to be hard. This is just to be importing 8th edition rules wholesale, which obviously is not going to be the case, but just something along those lines.
Yeah. Oh, what have we got next, Jeremy? We've got Grand Cathay Constructs.
Ah, yes. What a unit! What a unit! These, before we start talking about them, the artwork of this article has some fantastic imagery of these constructs stuck into the walls and the towers of the citadel, waiting to come alive, which I just thought was so cool. But yeah, what do you think of these, Dan?
Oh, I absolutely love them. I think they're brilliant. I like everything about them aesthetically. I think it's just great to see. And like you said, they're from a bygone era where the Celestial Dragon needed them for a war against chaos, and now they're no longer. They don't need a whole army of them, and they're just kind of left over. And you can see them quite commonplace across the empire. They're standing in fields, or people have built them into the walls of cities, and then there's an inner light that they have, and then it begins to burn when they're needed, when chaos comes, and then they spring into action and start to fight wherever they are.
Yeah,
there's a bit in there, the tagline, and it just says, "As happy destroying steam tanks and city gates as it is laying waste to enemy armies."
Yeah, I was about to emphasize that. I just thought it was nice to sort of relate that to, again, a pre-existing army and go, yeah, this is going to be tough, and this is going to stamp all over some other factions' toughest and hardest units. So yeah, I like it.
So yeah, I like the idea that a steam tank is rolling on, and then you've got maybe the general's just going, right, bring out the tin opener, and then out he comes.
In my head it's just kicking it or just stamping it, and it's going for flying into the air or something.
What's interesting about these is how many there are, because the Empire never had that many steam tanks. I don't think there were ever more than 10, like in the whole Empire, at any one time. And they just seem to have sort of endless terracotta sentinels just across the landscape and in the city walls and all these sorts of things.
And the other thing that I was thinking about, just from a kit point of view, is that obviously we've got these massive giant sets that Games Workshop has brought out now. So I was just wondering how big this thing is going to be. Is it going to be their size? Is it going to be the size of the smaller giant kits, or the size of an older dragon? But there is the Games Workshop have the sculpting ability now to make something truly massive that could really like stand over and dwarf the entire army.
In my mind, it was the same size as a giant, but you're right. I mean, even back before they did the Mega Gargants for Age of Sigmar, the Forge World Giant was always massive as well, wasn't it? So there's nothing to say it couldn't be that big. All right, Jeremy, why don't you tell us about the Sky Lantern and the Sky Junk? Because I think these have won you over, haven't they, since you read the article? A unit that you were a bit skeptical about.
Yeah, I initially I was like, oh, that's interesting, but just reading through the article about like actually what they would perform, about how you've got what is it? It's the Sky Lantern, which has got 4 gunners, 4 crane gunners sitting in there. I enjoy the fact it's generally agreed they have a lot more fun than their landlocked cousins, and I was like, yeah, I quite like the idea of having like massive sniper rifle like floating up above the enemy, not able to get to me. I thought that sounded quite good fun. And also we talked about it earlier, but the fact that they can be used as to spot enemy, to sort of keep an eye on the battlefield. I like that sort of logistical enhancement they could bring to them as well. And also just like some of the practicalities that these things, although they're powerful, they're slow and barely mobile, which you can imagine as just floating and moving very gently and lazily across the sky.
I wonder if with their fans and signals and things that they do, because this army doesn't have a battle standard bearer, if they'll be able to take like a magical fan or something instead of a magical banner that they could like hoist up above the army and give some kind of boost to.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see. Because which one is it where you can put the magistrate inside, and then
the Sky Lantern,
that is, a lantern, isn't it? Yeah. I also like the fact that that the Sky Junk can just drop bombs on people's heads. I just think that's good fun as well. So fire cannons from the side, bombs directly below. So
yeah, it's very reminiscent of the Gyro Bomber, isn't it? That came out late in Warhammer Fantasy Battles.
But I enjoyed this so much more. This is far more fun.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about the Sky Junks is, and we haven't seen this from the artwork, in my opinion, but it likens them to ships from the Imperial Navy, and I'd like to see it actually look like a ship with like an airship, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I think that'd be cool. It does say that they are near useless once out of ammunition, and I wonder why they say that. Can they only carry so many bombs or something like that? It's not something that I want to see in the game, if I'm honest, that it would run out of ammunition.
It's one, and that might be one of the differences between computer games and the actual miniatures game, because you can kind of do that thing in a computer game, and it doesn't have as many consequences. You play a single battle, you might have like, I don't know, like say 6 shots, and then you're out and done. But if you introduce that into the war game itself, I think that'd be probably quite frustrating, just to have this thing floating around, not able to do anything more apart from get in the way. So
it's going to be difficult enough to maneuver it, isn't it? If they're if they're slow moving units, it's going to be difficult enough to get it into a position where it's going to drop a bomb on its choice target, and you don't want it to have run out by the time it gets there, to the target that you really want. So
the other thing that I thought was also really good about these is that they sound like they're going to be another unit which is going to really help protect Cathay's flanks. So obviously we've talked a bit about the light cavalry playing a really important role, but these units feel like there's an opportunity potentially to give like 360 cover and sort of keep those flanks safe, because this looks like an army where a flank charge against it could be pretty devastating.
Yeah. All right, and lastly, we've got war machines. So this is something else where we were talking before we recorded about potential dual kits, and we have to say that the Grand Canyon and the Fire Rain rocket are near identical, with the exception of the barrel, aren't they?
Absolutely.
They're very similar looking units, but obviously have very different roles on the battlefield. So the cannon, it does exactly what it says on the tin, except it fires flaming armor-piercing projectiles. In terms of its cannonball, it's going to be a flaming weapon. And also, Jeremy, you were talking about the oxen that pull it, weren't you?
Yeah, so obviously in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, you rarely got the steeds pulling the war machines around, but this emphasizes and sort of highlights that. So I was wondering whether maybe it would come with some sort of oxen, and so potentially if the cannon got moved out of place, it could potentially be moved further. Like further around a corner, sort of redeployed to get a better line of sight. So that might be interesting to see if that actually happens.
The Kislev ice cannon, Little Grom, that has polar bears pulling it around, and it's on kind of like skis. So it might be something that we do see. And actually, I think that was modelled in the artwork for the Kislev cannon, and obviously we know the artwork comes from the team at Games Workshop, so it may well be something that we see. How useful it is, I don't know. It depends on the range of the cannon, doesn't it? If it's a shorter range cannon, then those oxen are going to come in pretty handy.
Yeah, in my head, their cannons were shorter range and less destructive than the Empire, but I can't remember where I read that or if I've just invented that. But I got the impression they might be slightly more limited in range. I think actually it was probably somewhere in the article they said actually this is an army where actually the artillery isn't as good as some other armies, so maybe that's what I'm referencing and insinuating from.
But it doesn't really matter if it's shorter range, because the army that you're playing against is going to have to come towards you. So, they're going to get in range eventually, no matter what.
Yeah, and what was the range of a great cannon in Empire? Was it 48 inches? So it was, even if you reduced to 30 inches, you're still gonna, have there to reach most units, aren't you?
Yeah. So next I'm going to talk about the Fire Rain rocket. The ultimate in-range firepower for the armies of Grand Cathay. These rocket launchers spray the battlefield with deadly explosive projectiles. So similar, and actually the inspiration for the Hellstorm rocket battery for the Empire. Nice to see the original.
Yeah, I had exactly the same thought myself when I saw it. Yeah, hopefully more fireworky, but yeah, sounds good.
It says here, left to its own devices and placed near a melee unit to increase its reload speed through yin harmony, Fire Rain rockets will happily wipe out whole formations.
And again, this is you may not worry too much potentially about your present bowman getting an extra round of shooting in, but if one of these gets an extra round of shooting in, you're certainly going to know it. So yeah, it demonstrates that those buffs are going to really I guess come into their own the more powerful the units are that are being amplified.
For me, it sounds less like the Hellstorm rocket battery and more like the Hellblaster volley gun.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it feels more like a Hellblaster volley gun, especially where it says that it has the potential to wipe out whole formations, because when all of the barrels of the Hellblaster volley gun fired off, it could be incredibly devastating. Obviously, it had a very high chance of blowing itself up, and this is something that the article doesn't mention. It doesn't talk about, what's going to happen if you misfire. But we've got to say that with all these explosives around, there's going to trying to improve the reload speed and doing these things, mistakes are going to happen, and they are going to blow up at some point.
Yeah, it's a fair assumption to make, isn't it? And it'll be a shame if the old world gets rid of that mechanic, because having siege weapons, war machines blow up was always hilarious and always great fun.
Yeah. And lastly, we've got the Wuxing War Compass.
Oh, I absolutely love this thing. Remind me of that Empire chariot thing that I've forgotten the name of, but hopefully you can remember it.
The Celestial Hurricanum.
Yes, that's the fella. Why did I not remember the name of that?
Yeah, I think you're right there. It's very similar to the Celestial Hurricanum, and that actually is is to do with heaven's magic as well, isn't it? Because it's got all that sort of stuff going on. It's got a heaven's mage on the front of it. And it's what's interesting about this is that it's yang aligned, so it's not. And yang, yin, we think of being a ranged unit, and I would think of a wizard as being a ranged unit, but this is yang, so this is going to be going straight into the battlefield, into the enemy units, and causing mayhem.
Yes, and it did just look like this is presumably the chariots that is referenced in the articles. So I was wondering, it's not actually pictured what's going to be pulling this into battle. Initially, I thought it would be some sort of oxen, but maybe if it's going to be more confrontational, potentially it could be some of maybe the Dragon Rider mounts, such Longma.
The Longma riders, yeah.
Potentially, or something else, which is with a a bit more of a bite to it, or something which is able to hold its own against the enemy.
I'm just looking forward to seeing what it does, because it says it's more than capable of tearing up the ground and crashing headlong into enemy forces, but it has significant ranged prowess as well. So it's a bit of a jack of all trades by the sounds.
It could be like the lizard men, was it Engine of the Old Ones, which sort of like would slowly advance on top of a stegodon and sort of would create this sort of like a magical vortex around it and sort of devastate anything that was nearby it.
We'll just have to wait and see with that one. So that is all of the units gone through, and the play style and the magic laws and everything that we pretty much know about them so far. So the only thing left to speculate about might be magic items and things like that we might see.
And one of the ones that when I was doing some research, just looking at Chinese history to try and find maybe some potential inspiration that Games Workshop might have made use of, was a Chinese invention called a fire lance, which was basically, if you imagine a poleaxe with some sort of explosive firework at the end of it, which could then be fired towards the enemy. I guess maybe kind of like a Skaven Doom rocket. So I do wonder whether potentially you'll be able to equip these fire lances to characters or heroes, so that they, as they charge into battle, they fire these explosives to devastating effect for the first round of combat, which could be quite cool to see.
I wonder if the Longma Riders will be able to take magic items, something like that, in a similar way that the Dragon Princes could, because they're also nobility, so they will have these heirlooms, and that would be something I'd like to see on a champion of one of those. When you go in, just fire a rocket as you charge into combat,
and that would again work not quite nicely in that sort of like that sort of almost fast cav roll of fire weapons, weaken them down a bit before then you deliver that devastating blow. So yeah.
Well, I think that's everything that we wanted to cover today. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for joining us.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
It's always good to have a historian's perspective, and you were proven spot on with the repeater crossbow. So good shout there, mate. Good shout.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for watching, and thank you especially everybody who made it this far to the end. It's been a good hour, so so well done if you made it this far. Obviously, we've got plenty more coming for the Old World and plenty more shows planned. So just stay tuned for more. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please make sure you subscribe to the channel to catch that. And we will catch you next time.